Welcome everybody to the DeFiChain Labs and Community Engineering Sync in September. As usual, this call is going to be recorded. We're going to have a brief intro, what this call is going to be about. Then I'm going to hand over to Prasanna to address a few of the, let's say, topics that we are going to discuss during this call. And in the end, I'm going to finish off the session. So one or two notes before we begin. This time, we actually saw a huge influx in questions ahead of the call. So as you might recall, since about 2 months, we are having a Google form where the community can submit questions ahead of time. Last time we had, I don't know, I think 2 questions or so. This time it's a lot more. I would say 20, maybe. And some questions we can directly address in this call. Other questions, especially about DeFiChain Labs as an entity, as a team, and let's say the specific role or scope that DeFiChain Labs takes. We're going to address those questions individually on a one-to-one basis, where we basically lay out all the questions in a document and give extensive answer to each and every one of the questions. The reason why we're going to approach it this way is this call is only going to be scheduled for 30 minutes. And the 20 questions would simply not fit into the current format. So let me maybe just address 1 or 2 things that came up in the questions. So a lot of questions were, I would say, regarding the CFP that we had in early 2024, so January this year, and the other CFP that is currently up for voting. And it's basically surrounding and asking questions about the team, DeFiChain Labs as an entity, and the job scope in general. And here I just want to address that we are in a bit of a transitioning period where a lot of these responsibilities are going to be, let's say, distributed into SIGs, so special interest groups. And you can basically see DeFiChain Labs as an entity transitioning into one of these special interest groups that will take over certain aspects of what previously was done, let's say, mostly from the bake side. So here is the question that kind of everybody can reflect before this is going to be posted in a long format document is all of these things that are currently being discussed and are going to be transitioning into a SIG obviously needed to happen and being coordinated, taken responsibility of, somewhat centralized or somewhat as a team that basically attended all of these things. And here, right now, we are in a transitioning period where some of these things are going to be outsourced to the community. Like, for example, we already have interest by the community for taking over oracles, but there is many, many more things that we basically need to distribute and find entities and solutions and governance that the community can get involved much more actively. So the first few things that I'm going to hand the questions or the topics over to Prasanna is, of course, the hard fork, some part of the special interest groups, and maybe a short bird's eye overview when it comes to governance. So these are the first things that we're going to discuss during that call, and all the other questions will be addressed in very extensively as soon as possible. So we're going to work together with, of course, the community, the core devs, content creators, and so on, to kind of really give you a deep insight into all of the questions that you raised, because the feedback and the questions that you guys brought up were amazing, and they should be addressed without a doubt, let's say. Yeah, with that bit longer intro than usual, I want to give the mic over to Prasanna so he can dive into the hard forks in specifically and any other topic that you feel are relevant. Thank you, Prasanna.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you, Fabio. All right. So this is, I think this week, it was really, first off, it was really good to have a good set of questions. I think that also helps us kind of target which is information that we want to cover a bit more. So Fabio already covered on the general context of some of them. So I'll start with first the technical updates, which is kind of the key purpose of the call. So I'll touch on that, and then the hard fork related stuff, and then what are the things that's pending. And then we'll transition a little bit more over to governance, because I think there are a lot of questions focused on governance, and I'll focus it from a technical point of view and how it's going to work and why it's going to work the way it's going to work. Right. All right. First off, let's kickstart. Just a moment. Okay, just sharing my screen. All right. So when it comes to the upgrades, so currently Changi node was released last week. And Kuki has been leading the charge on restarting the DToken system on Changi. And but how we're running it, I think we found a few minor bugs here and there. Kuki found them, and Kuki and Peter has been working together to fix some of those. So it's there now. We would actually be setting another release with some of them, which basically takes into account some more of the unexpected conditions, like what happens when an oracle is not live, what happens when a token is locked, so all these kind of conditions. So that's being taken care of now, and then there's going to be another node release shortly just to cover that. So we do one more round of testing with this, and then a little bit later today, Peter is also planning to set a couple of token splits, post the restart, just to kind of understand behavior, make sure that everything is good. So I'll be doing that, and I think token restart is nearly getting there to a point where we can get it to a solid phase by the end of this week. And that's one. Then the final list of things that is there are, so rejecting of pastime blocks, that's already active on Changi. I think so far it looks pretty great. I think we can just move it to ready and good to go. And then updating token address. This is a new part. It's still in testing. You just have to do a little bit of basic testing there. This will happen this week. And then deprecation of tokens. That's another thing that's there in testing. So all of the things that are marked as testing are things that are complete. That is there. It's live on Changi. It's just that it needs a little bit more testing. And yeah, so if you're somebody who wants to get involved in testing, please let us know. And we'll be happy to give you a couple of governance keys, which is the new governance system. So using the governance keys, you can also set some of these, and you can also test some of these things. But just reminder, Changi is meant to roll back really quickly for developers. So it's more of we very quickly we want to just release updates and then test it. So if you want to wait a little bit more for a stable point of testing, then testnet, hopefully late next week, is kind of a better place to start this. So token deprecation, that's another thing that's in testing. And then restructure of foundation. I'll cover a little bit more on what this means, a little bit alongside governance. Then community governance. So that's also currently community governance is already there. And then, for instance, an example, Kuki is using those keys to set things. And then, yeah, DToken restart, that's the other one in testing. One thing that is still, that's been a little bit delayed, that didn't go in last week, was faster block time. So that PR had a little bit more missing. Peter is just wrapping that up. So we'll also have one more with that. So just to put everything on the time horizon, first Changi this week, it's going to be just the final period of testing plus bug fixes, and then testing of all of the above, which is also ongoing this week. And then the third one is there's going to be a node update with two things. One is update for community governance. What that means is governance is something where we're basically phasing out the old foundation model, and then where multiple people from the community can be involved in the governance aspects and the execution of that governance. So those ones, currently it's modeled very closely to the foundation, which means everybody can use set governance, and then set governance height to set some governance parameter at a later point in time. The final set of changes that are still yet to come this week is to prevent abuse of this. We also wanted to add The community governance will not be able to use setgov at all. Everything is going to move to just setgov height. So which is anytime you want to set something, so there's going to be enough time buffer for everybody else to audit it. And if at all there is something that's happening, for the execution SIG to come in and cancel that. So everything is going to have that capability. So just adding in those final bits for that is the part that's missing. Then the other one is going to be missing pieces on completing the work for faster block time. Once this is done, then there's going to be another Changi rollback this week. I think all of these should be able to, we should comfortably get all of this in this week. And after another Changi rollback, everything looks good, then we can set the target for testnet. That's going to be next. And as usual, targets are going to be testnet. And then once it's stable a little bit on testnet, we set the node release. And then node release is going to be, plus 2 weeks. So you get a little bit more testing after that, and then network upgrade. So we're looking at mid-October as the final actual upgrade for it to happen. Right. So we are working with we are aiming to get everything stable by the end of the month. So we actually have a node release. That is the basic updates. Now, updates aside, let me jump on to governance. So there were a lot of questions on governance. Yes, we're still working on it. At the moment, we are focused on just getting everything that's needed in the node ready on one side. Once it's there, once everything is just purely in testing phase, everybody's testing, we'll also add more updates to governance. This is a repository that we've been working on. It's still not public yet, but expected to sometime next week. Long story short of it, I'll just cover, this is a very basic draft, but I'll just cover some of the evolution of it and why things are where they are, and then where to go from here. So just super quick parts on evolution. The very first Genesis, it was built with a set of foundation keys. So those foundation keys handled creation of DATs and creation of minting those DATs, right? So, and then the DFIPs and CFPs were always handled on GitHub. These are the early days. The intent was to get everything up and running quickly, because otherwise you need a lot of work to be actually done regarding these to decentralize all of them. So this gave us a fast path to just get the DEX up and running, get oracles, vaults, nodes, all of that up and running. So this is how it started. Then Bayfront was one of the forks that brought in liquidity, and then liquidity, DEX, and by stuff relating to the pool. So what this meant was you also needed to have more things that had to be changed. So all of that was still assigned to the foundation keys. So the foundation keys essentially ended up getting more responsibility to be able to set previous ones plus the DEX plus the pool. DFIP and CFPs were still handled on GitHub. Then Fort Canning brought in more, vaults, loans, economy, lots. It brought in a lot more centralized operations. So those centralized operations, the intent was always to decentralize them. But then back in the day, it was like, okay, let's get it up and running. It started up. Then, but in Fort Canning, what was introduced was essentially on-chain attributes. So these on-chain attributes, you're able to have a little bit control on-chain. But who can set those on-chain attributes was still the set of foundation keys. Those are the only ones that could set them. Right. So the eventual goal was to move away from it, but that's where we're getting to. Critical operations still handled by kind of foundation keys. Then came Grand Central upgrade. That was the Grand Central upgrade. This was the first upgrade. With the highlight here was it actually introduced on-chain governance. Right. So this is the first part but that moved so DFIP, CFP, everything moved on-chain. It was no longer done on GitHub repository. So there was no longer a central entity. Everything was fully decentralized. And everybody can just create one whenever they want. And then it's just, every masternode votes on it, and operations basically follows this. But the critical operations, many of them, this includes setting of the DEX fee, and then assignment of new oracles and things like that, they still use foundation keys. Right. So, and now comes to the upcoming upgrade. So this basically is to move away from this and to actually decentralize this. Okay, what does this mean? We're doing two things. One is today Foundation has a lot of intricate powers here and there. So the first step we're doing is basically downsizing all of those to a point where it's still operational, but we want to move completely out of that. Right. So that's phasing out of Foundation. That's part one. And part two is how does the actual decentralization of governance happen, which is the community governance that we're bringing in. Touch on this a little bit more as well. But critical operations after this, how it's going to look like is, so there is going to be this governance repository where the key collaboration is going to happen. What does that mean? If a fee has to be changed, then it's going to go through this GitHub process where there will be an issue that's created. And then the special interest group, ideally, you're the one who creates it, or if somebody else creates it and assigns it to a special interest group, then they will validate it. And then each of the members of the group will acknowledge those. And there's enough acknowledgement, then they will assign it to the governance SIG, to the execution SIG. Execution SIG is basically going to take the place of the foundation keys. But the way it's being faced is, now it's no longer a certain small central entity, but it's a more transparent group of decentralized community. And how the governance of the execution SIG itself is going to be is up to the governance SIG to come up with, how do you appoint members, how do you rotate members, all of that. Right. So basically, collaboration happens there, and then execution happens there. Now, does it change anything related to the current DFIPs and CFPs? No, absolutely not. All of them are already on chain. We've moved that. So this is what we are targeting with the current fork is basically things that are not already on chain, which are very central elements. We're just taking those central elements and then paving the way for them to move eventually fully on chain. Right. So that's what we're doing. Then a much later phase for this would be to phase out the execution SIG as well entirely. The reason for the existence of the execution SIG today is primarily because of the fact that we cannot break up everything in one go. If you keep waiting for that, then there's a lot of engineering work that needs to go in. So for instance, Oracle SIG gets rights to just execute Oracle operations. DEX and Economy SIG just gets the rights to execute DEX and Economy operations. That's the eventual place where we want to go, but waiting for that because we've already packed it with so many large technical updates, so adding that also right now does not make sense. But however, we can also just keep waiting for it. So that's where the introduction of the execution SIG comes in. Execution SIG takes a more decapitated version of foundation keys. So foundation keys are much more downsized. We've removed a whole bunch of powers for both the foundation keys as well as the governance. Governance and foundations are going to be equivalent after the DF24 fork, except for some legacy aspects. Then, so how is it going to happen a little bit more? Getting into it. So, the general governance continues to be on-chain voting, no change there. Centralized part of the governance that's been interested to a few people who do everyday operations. All of that is now going to be phased out and then moved into this model. Now, existing foundation rights are being downsized. What does that mean? There are a couple of things where foundation can mint any DAT token. So all of those stuff related to that, we're completely removing. So foundation only has a similar role as the governance. We are equalizing both of them. So you cannot affect somebody else's token. Right, so that's a prerequisite to actually move token system out fully into the community. So this again, this existing, so this part is just keep in mind that it's something to be removed eventually, right? It's more of a stepping stone to where we want to get to. Then what's going to happen with this essential governance model? It's broken down into several special interest groups. But the key special interest groups are going to be one for execution. That's basically taking over from foundation. Then there's going to be a node SIG, which is going to be based on node releases. These are the people who currently manage the node. And then token economy SIG, which is going to be taking over responsibilities of, hey, what is a new token that's got to be introduced? When does a token has to be deprecated? And values relating to the DEX for those particular tokens, all of those. Oracle SIG is basically running oracles and then appointing new oracles, kicking out old ones, and then keeping that, maintaining. That's the Oracle SIG. Explorer Infra is going to be things related to explorers, and which is going to be Block Scout, which is going to be DeFi Scan. All of that is open source, but then, who's going to be running it, and how is that process essentially coming in with the rest of the governance. Why this is important is, let's say if somebody else owns DeFi Scan is a very critical part of the ecosystem. Then there's what if somebody else sets it to a different IP? So we want all of that to be a part of this trusted set of network that we are creating, right? So we have to decentralize it, but at the same time, who handles all these central elements is something that we need to bring it out in the open. So that's where these are going to be handled through public repositories, but the Explorer SIG is the one who ensures, okay, what are the new IPs we add? What are the new IPs we remove? Who else from the community is going to be part of it? So it's essentially dissolving all of these into smaller different groups, which can be very focused and then execute all of these. Then wallet, the same thing. The code for Light Wallet is open source. And for all of these special interest groups from the community, if you want to be a part of any of these, please let us know, and we want volunteers for all of them, right? So we as a community have to pick up everything. That's how decentralization actually works. So yeah, if based on what your interests are, if I believe Oracle SIG is already in place, and then for everything else, please reach out as well. And for each of them, there are also going to be a couple of more. So what's going to happen is each SIG is going to maintain its own directory in this GitHub repository on its own key operations on how the SIG governs itself, right? So which is going to be essentially, okay, what does it mean? Let's say an Oracle SIG, what does it mean to achieve consensus? Maybe as an example, maybe if there is hypothetically 5 people in the Oracle SIG, in order for somebody to appoint a new Oracle, let's say maybe 3 out of 5. And it could be any number. It could be, like 100 and then 50 out of 100. Doesn't matter, right? I'm just using it as an example. But what is that M by N? So is essentially set by this Oracle SIG, and that governance is transparently put inside this directory in governance. And this is the amount of acknowledgement that's going to be taken by the execution SIG. So execution, once the Oracle SIG decides that, okay, we have to execute this, the command, everything is out there, they just tag the execution SIG. And the execution SIG, the only thing they have to validate is, hey, does it abide by the rules of engagement of Oracle SIG, which is going to be, what is that end rule of engagement? Maybe it's M by N is the final validation. Is there enough acknowledgement? If there is then execution SIG merely executes it, right? So the whole intent is, because we are facing off and moving away from that foundation part, but not necessarily waiting for all of the technical components to be in, is the sole reason we have an execution SIG. So execution SIG by design does not have any authority on decisions whatsoever, right? They are going to rely on each of the other SIG coming to consensus based on their own rules, right? So, and each SIG is going to figure out how they want to do it, what is the time period in which you want to rotate members, how are the members appointed, how are the members removed. So all of that, each SIG, because each of these are categories that are so diverse, which may have similar rule sets might not apply. So it's going to be that each SIG figures out its own rule set. The communication point is the governance repository. So that hopefully gives a high-level view on how this is going to work going forward. And then zooming out, just let's say, if you want to actually execute something, how is it going to work? As simple 5 steps. Basically, it's going to start with creating an issue in the governance repo that's addressed to a specific SIG. So let's say a new Oracle has to be added. It's going to be, anybody can create an issue and just point at the Oracle SIG to say, okay, this is the command, this is the new Oracle. These are the information about oracles, everything that the SIG needs to actually validate it and to decide whether or not it goes through. Then the SIG members can discuss in whichever of the socials, Discord, or through personal chat, whatever it is, for everybody to align, because at the end of the day, it's a decentralized community. So even though there are some go-to, which is today is the Discord, but The governance as a whole is not going to bother setting any sort of limitations on it. This is going to be up to the SIG to figure out, right? So then the SIG discuss, and then finally they put their acknowledgement or a negative acknowledgement in GitHub in that same issue. And if it has enough acknowledgement by, let's say, M by N, let's say 3 on 5 people need to agree. Say the 3 people who have transparently said, okay, this is something that I want to go through of that SIG, then they've achieved consensus. When they've achieved consensus, they basically reassign this to the execution SIG. Execution verifies consensus has been achieved, then that's it, executes it. And they will execute it, document the execution alongside, what is the TX. If there were issues in the TX, then they basically just reassign it for that SIG to solve that and then come back. Execution's role is purely just executing it. Now, why does this also help is if it's going to be pretty easy to just write a bot that monitors, what are all the transactions that's going out from the execution SIG, and to make sure that anything that ever has to be executed on chain always goes through this repository, right? If there's something there that shouldn't be set, then unset gov is something that can always be executed by the execution SIG. So if somebody executes something accidentally, then execution SIG can immediately revoke that. And this is part of also the new changes that I said is incoming this week, which is going to be anything execution SIG sets is always going to be a few hours ahead in time. So we're thinking of starting it out with something like 6 hours, but that's going to be configurable on chain as well. Right. So hopefully this gives some context. We'll add more documentation into it and then specifics on how each of them are going to work. We'd also want the community to be a part of it and designing how each of the SIG is going to work by itself. But this is just the high-level details. And I think also there was one very specific question on, hey, why is this not gone through a DFIP? Eventually, yes, it is going to be going through a DFIP as well, how this process is going to look like. But that being said, we're trying to first get all of the features in. And 2 is there is no change in current behavior. Right? I want people to understand that very clearly. So what we're doing is we're downsizing the current powers of the central foundation set of keys. We're not adding anything to it. We are removing it, in fact. Right? So we are removing it, and then whatever is the current role of foundation, we are switching that. We are opening that up to all of these SIGs. So that's what we're doing. So currently we are taking cue from what are all the tasks that's there to keep the chain running, and for the next future, what are the things that we'll need and how things have to evolve. So our goal is first, immediately we build out some of these. So the SIGs are not a part, it's not there on chain at the moment, right? So it is an abstract concept that's outside of the chain. Execution set of keys are the only thing that's there on chain, right? And the eventual goal is, at the moment, we bootstrap it with these SIGs, which are the necessary SIGs at the moment. And then post that, any change that the community wants to do to these SIGs, if there's a new SIG that's being introduced, that's going to go through that's going to go through a DFIP again, right? So, and if the SIG has to be removed, that's going to go through a SIG again. That's going to go through the regular governance voting and then DFIP again. That's the general construct. All right. So, if there are any other questions on this particular construct, reach out at the same time. Maybe give us time until next week so we have a little bit more time to push out some of these. But if you think there are fundamental changes that you want to do, please reach out to us at this point. Yeah, so this was a long one, but I think that should be the high-level aspects to it. All right, and then just touching up on a few more things. Ocean is the other large one, Ocean merging into the node. The highlight there was, I think there was, Ocean is currently syncing, but there's one bug that the team identified, which they're fixing this week, which is token splits was something where the EVM token splits that had a bug on the Ocean layer. So team is addressing that now. Once that's resolved, once we have a full sync of Ocean all the way through, then we're just going to merge that in. So that I also expect this week The full sync takes about 4 to 5 days. So next week, I think we should have everything merged in. But Ocean is not related to the hard fork. These are work that can go parallelly, but we want to make sure that we get that in as before the restart as well, because it's going to help the restart go much faster. There are also a couple of other performance improvements that we're working on for token restart. This, again, it's not necessary to hit the node stable release immediately, but one of the things that we're working on is currently consolidation is something that's basically the whole chunk of it that takes hours to do. It happens on each token split. Right now we can optimize snapshots, which really helps massively. But we've been exploring on, hey, how can we actually just make it a regular process so it becomes maintenance free? And it just automatically, every node will automatically, once you kick started with an optimized snapshot, it'll periodically run this and amortize the time across. So whenever your node is sitting idle, it's automatically going to consolidate. So it's never going to be stuck on one block. Right? So that's something that we're working on, because without it, an unoptimized token restart is going to take about a day. It's going to stall the network for about a day. Right? But with all of this in, it should just be a non-event or a couple of minutes. So that's another thing that we're working on. All of this should, in the next 2 weeks, come together. Okay, that was a super long one, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
sure. Thanks, Prasanna, for all the insights. I'm just on the timeline. So what we're going to do is, together with Prasanna and the development team, with our content creation team, we're going to sit together, go through all the questions that were submitted via the Google form, and try to answer them one-on-one on an individual basis extensively, so there's no doubt left regarding any of the questions. A lot of them were not really focused on engineering itself, but mainly around the CFP and the transition, let's say, away from big into a more decentralized approach. Give us a few days to kind of work out specifics and to really go into detail when it comes to these questions. And then for the October session of the engineering call, this will be scheduled mid-October on a Monday again. And the theme there will definitely be hard fork, the token restart, which is I think right about that time, or should be in place by then. And then, of course, main theme is governance and SIGs and the, let's say, next stage of the transition. The call will, as usual, be announced ahead of time. We are trying to announce it a bit earlier next time, so you have a bit more time to submit questions. Just in case, for everybody that's listening to this as a recording or that is participating in this call, you can submit the questions via the same Google form ahead of time. So we're going to keep the same Google form that is in place right now. The link is already out there, so you don't need to wait until we announce the call. You can already submit questions as of now, basically. And yeah, with that said, thanks everybody for tuning in, and see you all mid-October. Thanks.